said that it resembles a well-practiced military assaults type, but other experts on the other end of the scale said, no, it resembles more of, say, a bank robbery crew. Nonetheless, though, it seems quite obvious that there was some planning, casing, and practice for this operation. How much time it would take before the French police arrived, for example.
All right, folks, joining us now to give his analysis of what we have seen over the past couple of days in France is Richard Perle, fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, former chairman of the Pentagon's Defense Policy Board, and former Assistant Secretary of Defense. And Richard, welcome, sir.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, it's always my pleasure. Well, why don't we start backwards? Were you surprised at how this all ended today with the insertion of yet another member, possibly, of this cell taking over the kosher bakery?
Well, I'm not surprised, but on the other hand, it's impossible to anticipate these particular events. What we know is that this act of terror will be followed by other acts of terror, because we do not have in place now, and are unlikely any time to put in place, policies that are up to the task of dealing with this scourge of terrorism, which appears in many countries, in many forms, and somehow the governments of the world don't seem to have a clue about how to deal with it.
And is it because they are being outmaneuvered and they're just not up to the task, or is it because they're afraid to confront what the problem is?
Well, I think part of it is a failure to face a reality, and the reality is that within the community of people who believe in Islam, there is a group, a small group, but nevertheless a group whose numbers are in the thousands and maybe tens or hundreds of thousands, who have a vision of Islam that entails the use of violence to bring about the triumph of Islam over the rest of the world. And until we face that fact and design strategies built on that recognition, these things will continue to happen.
Now, let's look at France, for instance. I mean, for everybody I'm talking to now, the reports are coming out, and this has been, I guess, the case for quite some time, and it's getting worse. There are no-go zones in France, and there might be in Britain as well, but let's stick to France, where cops don't go in. You can't arrest someone. They don't try to arrest anybody. The laws are Sharia. They have their own little court system set up. Nobody goes near them. It's kind of a mini country within a country. How could that be allowed to happen?
Well, it's happened gradually over time, and it's now at the point where the police and the civil authorities in France and some other places simply don't know how to cope with it. It's not acceptable to have a separate and violent culture in the midst of an open and democratic society, because open societies have no defense against this kind of violence unless they can deal with it directly, and that means you've got to be able to go anywhere to enforce the laws. You can't decide that this suburb or that suburb is predominantly Muslim, and therefore the law can't be enforced.
I mean, my God, I can't imagine it ever happening here. Although you're more aware of this than I, and more schooled on this than I in your time as serving in the administrations that you've served and the Pentagon, etc. Do you see any similarities? Although we don't have as large a Muslim population, it is growing. It is increasing. Immigration by Muslims to this country is growing. Do you see any similarities when that situation in France, for instance, the no-go zones, was in its infant stage? You said it progressed over time. Do you see any analogy to be made from their early days to where we are now, where we may be heading?
I don't think so. And the reason for that is that, by and large, American Muslims are integrated into American society. That is much less true in France, and it's much less true in some other countries. But it requires constant attention, and we and some others, I say we, both the federal government and some state and local police enforcement agencies, are reluctant to face the reality that I was describing a moment ago, that there is within this subculture a violent strain that has to be dealt with. And if you look at who purports to represent American Muslims, for example, moderate American Muslims who are outspoken in their opposition to this subculture and this kind of violence are never invited to the White House, for example. The Muslims who are invited to the White House are the ones who take a more extreme position, not, to be sure, advocating violence.
Right.
That we've seen.
I want to follow up on that and also on what the president said today when we come back. Richard Perle will join us once again. Stay where you are, folks.